Hi everyone, welcome back to Babylon Irons. Today we're going to talk about West Ham versus Tottenham, the big London derby, or as Spurs fans like to call it, the West Ham final. You know, the team that they don't care about, but yet they always reference it's our final. Weird, very weird situation. But, that's just how they be. But anyway, all that aside, we're going to look at both teams, what this game could bring, the importance of this game as well for us after winning our last game to carry on that momentum, and arguably the international break coming at the wrong time for West Ham, but at the right time when we think about the likes of Somerville and his injury getting a bit longer to kind of recuperate and get himself up to fitness. The same with Gilham as well. So it's had probably a more beneficial period, I think, for West Ham in some respects to get some players back. And Tottenham probably had a bit of time to think about what they're going to do with all of their new additions as well, with the likes of Xavi Simons, and then obviously one of our favourites, Moani as well, joining as well. So it's going to be some interesting selections coming up. But sort of West Ham Tottenham, what are your initial thoughts before we kind of dive into the game?
Well, I think if you'd asked me say 2 weeks ago, it's the international break. If you'd asked me after the Chelsea game, I'd have been like, "Oh God, this is a nightmare." But I think that we've got a really interesting opportunity here to see a bit more from this team, and I think for me there are lots of questions to be asked about Graham Potter and his selection. I think a lot of the outcome of this game will depend on whether we stick with this 4-3-3 or whether we change back to a five at the back. And I think if we do that, it's going to be a very difficult game to win. I just don't see how we get anything from it. And I think our very best possible chance and the best way to get the fans on side as much as they can be at the moment with the situation and the ownership, I think you have to play four at the back. You have to be positive. But I think it's interesting from a Spurs point of view as well, like speaking to them, my friends after the Bournemouth game where they lost and by all accounts were really, really poor. If you'd ask them, given the performances of the previous two games, they'd be bang up for it. After the Bournemouth game, it seems like they've kind of had their confidence knocked as well. And I think our favourite person came into criticism quite a lot for his role in that game and his performance. And I think that if we can catch them on an off day, like the Bournemouth game, we have a decent chance. But not if we play five at the back, and not if we have certain selections in the middle of the park, I think.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree. And if you look at how teams lined up in their last game, it's probably these are definitely not going to be the lineups, but it's probably fairly close. If we look at the Tottenham one first, this has basically been their lineup for the last two games. But obviously, since then, they have had the likes of Xavi Simons. They have had the likes of Moani sign. So there is that selection option there for Thomas Frank, where maybe he may look to move Johnson to the right-hand side to accommodate Xavi Simons on the left, and he may then drop Richarlison, who's actually been in very good form this season. In the start, which very much contrary to much of his Tottenham career. And again, he may bring in Moani there, which is, but I mean, otherwise it's at this early stage in the season, you say it's settled. They've had two games in a row with the exact same lineup. They've had obviously a positive result in the Man City game when they won, I think it was 2-0, and obviously lost to Bournemouth. So as you say, that's probably knocked confidence a little. And when we look at ours, I think, as you say, we can't really go to that back five. It doesn't seem to really work for us. I think that's mainly because the engine room. I really thought about there probably only be two changes from our team. One's enforced, obviously, because We know Fulbrook has a slight tight calf and he has done some light training, but I suspect he will start from the bench in this game, and Wilson will start due to how well Wilson played in the game against Forest. And I think it's a toss-up between Ward-Prowse and Souček as to who starts. The only reason I went for Ward-Prowse is because he's meant to be our vice captain, so it's the only reason I put him ahead of Souček. And I think Magassa, if you're going to start him, there's probably no better point than to start him really in a London derby, so he can really get to feel what it is. I wouldn't be surprised if Graham Potter erred on the side of caution, decided Magassa to start from the bench and to go with Souček and Ward-Prowse because, as the old saying goes, is you don't change a winning team, which is why I haven't put Somerville in that team as well, which is probably ideally I would like to see that midfield two, that kind of double pivot to be Magassa and Fernandez, and then you have Somerville on the left. But I think in terms of fitness and where we are in the season, I'd probably say that's probably as close as it's probably going to be to that kind of team selection for the time being. I think in the next couple of games we might see Somerville starting and then obviously Fernandez sitting alongside Magassa. But what do you think is going to be the key matchups for us? Assuming Tottenham went with the same lineup and they didn't make changes, that in mind, I think they might do because they lost their last game. But what do you think is going to be the key matchups for us in which to try and, yeah.
I think it's probably the game's either going to be won or lost in the middle of the park, and we always say this. We must sound like a broken record. But,
no, yeah.
But I think that's where we'll see the game won or lost. And I think you look at the likes of Pape Matar, he's been such a huge talent and just physical phenom. Really, he's
Noah playing really liked at Mets as well that we called out,
and he's someone who just is consistently working hard, covering ground, getting stuck in, physically imposing, and you cap that all off with actual ability on the ball. Then if he starts getting other players involved, if he starts to get and hassle someone like James Ward-Prowse and really force them into mistakes, and I think that Spurs will see some good results from that. But it's a difficult one to really try and guess too much about, because if the Kudus from our last season with him turns up and he's up against Sarr, then he's going to really struggle. He's going to find it really hard to play against him, and it's all about which team turns up. Like if it could well end up being like a certain internet meme where if both teams are poor, then it's going to be a real just stinker of a performance from both sides. But I think the middle of the park is key to it. The big bonus that I take from last game against Forest is that our defence actually looked pretty solid.
Yeah.
And when I would have normally said it's the spine of the team, that's what's going to lose us the game, I'm now looking at Mavropanos and Kilman and thinking there is something there that could potentially be a pretty solid partnership. And the way they handled Chris Wood, Callum Hudson-Odoi, and Morgan Gibbs-White, all of those sort of quality players, I think, puts me in a little bit of confidence for this game in terms of defensive output. But again, if we choose to switch to a back three, then that all goes out the window, and that's where I think there's so many variables about this. I'm not really asked who plays up front, to be honest, because I think that we're in a situation now where, as much as I was impressed with Callum Wilson when he came on, you cannot rely on Callum Wilson to be your number one striker and starting striker. He's going to have to come off at, say, 60-minute mark, and if he doesn't, I'll be amazed. It's a real worry, and I think that if we're almost going to look to get him to just sit on the last Tottenham defender, just sit there, try and be touch contact with him within touching distance, and if he can do that, try not to cover too much ground, kind of build your fitness while you're in this game, then I think we can maybe look to bring on someone like Marshall if Fulcrum is fit. But it's the striker's the position, funnily enough, that I think makes the least impact for us at the moment, because I have so little faith that either of them will stay fit for 90 minutes.
Yeah, no, that's a very valid point. And you mentioned about things which team turns up and how they play. And I think when we look at Spurs, when we look at what they've done since Frank has started, they're far more defensively resolute. They've conceded one goal, I believe, this season. That was the one against Bournemouth, and that also took a wicked deflection. It was a great bit of movement from Evan Nilsson and tidy and patient play from Bournemouth around their area. But we have to be honest, it took a massive and wicked deflection to beat the goalkeeper. But it was
I
a
do
good
think that if you speak to any Spurs fans, even they'll tell you, that they were very lucky that they didn't concede 3 or 4 more.
Yeah.
And I think
Bournemouth played some really good football. This is a bit.
Yeah.
I think one of the commentators also said what was interesting was what Tottenham did so well against Man City, where they were incredibly aggressive, really always on the front foot, pushing from the front, looking to win the ball, is what Bournemouth did to them. And Tottenham were the complete reverse. And maybe it was the players maybe looking down a little on Bournemouth and not expecting it. But I think, what we've seen of Bournemouth under Iraola is that they are going to be a team that are going to go for everyone. And when we look at that game, I think what it does show is some interesting things around kind of Tottenham in terms of their position-wise. So this is the average positions. The team on the left is the team that started the game, and then the team on the right is the one that once they made the sub. So you can see those positions far more advanced in the front line because obviously they're chasing the game. But what is interesting about Thomas Frank is that he always keeps a very, very tight team, but also expansive team at the same time. And when we look at that kind of first half, where you can obviously see the 2 centre-backs, you can see the full-backs both pushed wide and high. You've got Kudus, the most advanced player forward, which is basically, when we look at Bowen, it's basically the same kind of process. On the left-hand side, you've got, Brennan Johnson. So really, what that does is your centre-backs, because where Richarlison is, means they've got that tricky point of, do you follow Richarlison? Do you hand him over to a midfielder? But again, if you look at that cluster, they've got 4 very tight players in there. So unless we're dropping a player back in and trying to make maybe a free of, say, like we saw against Nottingham Forest, where we saw Fernandes basically dropping in alongside Souček and Ward-Prowse, there's a chance that Tottenham can create an overload in there and then get the ball wide as they kind of encourage us to kind of congest in the middle. So I think when we look at how Spurs are going to play, we either have to just contest the central area and essentially give up the wide positions, or we're going to have to kind of be a bit spread. I would personally like us to see it be a bit more congested and say, put it into the wings, whip it in the box, and we're going to trust Mavropanos, we're going to trust Kilman to get the ball. And obviously, if we do go ahead, when we look at that second side, I think that very much tells you what to expect from Thomas Frank. He's not going to be scared about pushing players forward and throwing them forward. They're going to be very, very advanced. Their fullbacks are going to be pushed really high. But what I think it definitely kind of suggests as well, when you look at that left-hand side, number 24, means Bowen is often going to be sitting in that spot just behind him. When you look at the average position, especially if we then go back to how we played, if you look at Bowen's average position, it is going to be directly behind that left-sided player, which is going to be Jed Spence, who is going to be looking to get forward all the time. Him being naturally right-footed means he's going to come in a bit more centrally, so he's never going to be arguably in a position where he's going to be right on Bowen, so to speak. He's always going to be maybe a little bit kind of more infield, which could give Bowen a little bit more space and give us great opportunities to kind of break out. Obviously, when you look at our second half, where we obviously came more into the game and were far more interesting, was obviously Callum Wilson's position. Bearing in mind he had about 30 odd minutes on the pitch, to have his position that high up is pretty impressive. Again, Somerville means when you look at number 7 in relation to number 18, he was gave us that width as well, which ultimately is what cost Nottingham Forest, because all of a sudden they dealt with this really congested kind of team to all of a sudden having to deal with a team that had width on both sides, Number 39 being Irving, again getting forward. Paqueta's average position actually doesn't change really at all across the game. But again, he coming over to that right hand side to help support Mavropanos, with Carl Walker Peters and Suchek. Also meant we were able to consistently have an overload on that side, which arguably meant that Forest would have to move over and create more space in the left hand side, which is where we saw the benefits from Somerville. So I think it could be interesting in that we do have the opportunity with Spurs. Probably our avenue is going to be in those flank positions. But again, I only think really we get some real kind of balance in that if Somerville starts or if Somerville comes on. So it's going to probably be, I feel, a bit like the Forest game, a game of attrition at first from us, and we'll be a bit more defensive, which I don't want us to be. We're at home. I'd rather us be a bit aggressive. And then in the second half, maybe then we'll open up a little bit more. But what are your thoughts when you look at kind of those average positions and how you think that might play out in terms of this game as well?
Well, I know people might sort of like, roll their eyes at average positions and those things, but I think what's really important to take from that is when you look at the average position of those centre backs, and it can really help paint a picture of how a coach sets themselves up, how they like to, drill the players. And particularly with Thomas Frank, you saw it at Brentford as well, and he's obviously taken it into Tottenham. He likes his centre backs to be very close to each other, or at least within sort of covering distance. And when I say
Yeah,
covering
exactly.
distance,
And when you look at
it's
this there with the Tottenham one, both very, very close together. No real kind of separation. Whereas you look at ours,
yep.
you can clearly tell that, say, Kilman has consistently dropped back to receive the ball for the goalkeeper, and Mavropanos is pushed up to be closer to his fullback. So, as you say, that there's about that drilled kind of aspect and what managers like to have the team set. It's interesting to say that
I
Tottenham's are
think that
far more as a partnership. You would argue.
yeah, definitely. And I think that when you look at say like Mavropanos, that his attributes kind of lend themselves to being further up the pitch, where he is that sort of much quicker and physical player. You want someone like Kilman, who's perhaps a bit more disciplined, to be the deeper player who can offset any rash challenge of him being last man and then denying an obvious goal scoring opportunity. So that's clearly something that's worked on, or we have seen in the last few games. But I think that the key for us to go into this is if we can get pace against their centre backs. And I think that Jed Spence is a very talented player. It's often a case of, I know that West Ham fans will say this, I've already said in the video, but what side
Yeah.
turns up, what player individual turns up and their attitude on the day. I know that can often be a case with Jed Spence, and it's been questioned in the past. And it's not just not picking on Tottenham, not picking on Jed Spence, but it's the same with a lot of players. It can be the same with Mavropanos, and whether he decides to actually be a defender or whether he just decides to try
Have
and
a
bully
complete brain
someone.
fart game.
Yeah, and I think that this game is going to be won or lost with that very issue. It sounds so like baseline
But it is
analysis, but
it comes. It's always one of these games where it can be individuals play up or individuals make telling mistakes. We've seen it so many times in this fixture where that has been the case. Lanzini has been a prime example of a player that has always seemed to have played up, and he's a couple of games got the winner in up to at London Stadium when Tottenham were on course for fighting for the title. He got the one in the 3-3 game as an example of when he's done it. We've seen Gareth Bale did it to us a good couple of times when he was here. Harry Kane as well.
I
But
think
we've
that
also seen when they're not performed and it go against them and us taking advantage.
I think that a big sort of cliche as well is going to be what happens early doors. If someone like Mavropanos or one of our players absolutely sticks it on Kudus and gets the place rocking, then it will be a much needed boost to the overall atmosphere at the London Stadium. And I think if we concede early, it will go completely the opposite way. And I
Yeah.
know these are all sort of like cliches and
But derbies are full of cliches, though, aren't they?
exactly,
It's like the biggest cliche game, and I think you're right. If Potter is to understand any of your West Ham fans, he would and should be telling every single player within the first 5 minutes, when Kudus gets on the ball, you hit him as hard as you can and you put him on his arse.
yeah,
I don't care if you get a card, we'll deal with that. You hit him as hard as you can, put him up in the air, back down then on his arse, because the crowd will go for it. Because
yeah,
they will love it, because it's an ex player who's giving it a bit. So he's already going to have the crowd on him. And if you smash him straight from the off, that fan base is going to be like, yes. And then if the next tackle is the same, doesn't matter then who it is, first two tackles after, say you've hit Kudus, smashed one or two after that, and then all of a sudden that fan base will go for it. As long as we're not
yeah,
conceded beforehand. But
yeah,
if that
exactly.
happens, it sounds really stupid and cliche, and it's really just Neil Warnock School of Football of kicking the fucking Roar's head, that kind of thing. But in this kind of derby, we've seen it so many times where when a player is like Mark Noble used to do it. One like a bit like Roy Keane, smash into him. It might make you feel better, but it was that kind of thing that sometimes he would do it. He would absolutely level into someone, and then would turn around, get to the crowd, get the punt, and it would work because the crowd would get up because it was, oh yeah, he doesn't like Tottenham as well. And it's so juvenile in its base sense, but that's what you want to see in a derby. You want to see someone get hit, your player to get back up, and their player to be crumpled on the floor. And it's so pathetically stupid, but it's the derby, and that's what you,
I'm
you want to see.
I'm going to be looking at the comments section as well because I can tell A, who will have played football, and B, who actually goes to the games. Because if they disagree with that in any way, they either haven't played the game or they don't go to the grounds. Every single football fan and Spurs fans, I'm sure, would agree.
Mm.
If one of their players absolutely sticks it on
Oh man,
Paqueta,
they'd love
the
it.
away crowd will go. They'll go through the roof, and I think that it's something that obviously we don't want to see players injured, but it's one of those things where if you can get the upper hand, make them have a bad game, then of course you want that to happen.
Exactly. You want derbies ultimately is about obviously the crowd creating an atmosphere, but also the players that are able to stamp and sometimes literally stamp their authority into the game. It's about creating doubt in the opposition of I'm not going to go into that challenge. Last time I went it, I got crumpled, and I'm not, and I don't feel it. It's these derbies do sometimes form can go out the window, and it can be all about essentially who wants it more. And again, we're talking so many cliches, but this is what derbies are. They are full of those cliches. If we go in with the prerequisite attitude to be aggressive, to push on to spot Tottenham, Bournemouth should be the blueprint for Potter to go, this is the attitude we need to have because we've seen Thomas Frank teams do really well in the past. Brentford, sometimes when teams were that aggressive and they did push on them, they did sometimes not perform as well. What they will be, though, as we know with Thomas Frank, is they're going to be very tough to break down, especially if they go a goal ahead. And if they go a goal ahead, then I fear Tottenham really could do us some damage. And we know what they have in reserve if they are going to, say, have Moani on the bench, if they are going to have Simmons on the bench. We are going to have to be careful if when they bring them on, especially if we're one behind and we're pushing forward, because they are players that will and can hurt you given a chance.
Yeah, and I think that when we talk about the key assets of the team and what I want to see happen, I don't want to see Somerville rushed back. I would like to see him
Yeah.
come off the bench because I think that if we start right and we make sure we keep a foot in the game, get control of it, or even if we just look comfortable defending and cause problems going forward, then we give ourselves a chance. And if we have that, say, on the 60th minute, and we have someone like Somerville, Gilherme off the bench to come on and run at Tottenham's defence, then we give ourselves a chance that we probably haven't had in sense of like impact substitutes
Mm-hmm.
for a good 2 seasons.
Yep.
So I think that for me, that's going to be a key element as well. We've already mentioned the setup from the start, and not changing. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Then we need to make sure that we're also safeguarding these players' fitness, because we could start Somerville. He could he could well be man of the match and say, I feel fitter than ever. But the likelihood is that after a long injury, it's a bit too early to start him.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't want to necessarily be in the position where about 50, 60 minutes in, you're having to. It's more an enforced change than a kind of a planned one.
Exactly.
I think being able to turn around to him and say, "Look, you're going to get at the best 45 minutes if we're having a bad first half, and I need to bring you on to change things up." But really, we should be saying to him, "Look, I can give you 30 minutes again, and I need you to go. When you go out in that 30 minutes, you just give everything. And in the next game, I'm probably going to start you, but I don't want to rush you back. So I want to see how you do over a 40 to 30 minute period. I know you're feeling good, feeling confident, which is great, but I need out there players that I know that can run if needs be for the full 90 minutes. At the moment, I can't say you can do that. Obviously, that kind of contradicts when we talk about Callum Wilson as well. But I think that's a very much needs must player has to play. Whereas Somerville, I think we do have that luxury to go, look, you've just come back. We need to ease you in. And I think he could be, as he showed in the Nottingham Forest game, if he can replicate that over the course of the season, that's a vitally important player for us. So, yes, I agree. Bringing him from the bench is probably what I would look to do as well, and keep the team, almost the team, against Nottingham Forest. Personally, I would drop Ward-Prowse, put Souček in there with Magassa, and have those two big kind of essentially engines in there. But also is just to, as we know with Thomas Frank and what we know with Brentford, his team was quality at set pieces, and I'd rather have those two players in there defending set pieces than I would rather than having, say, Ward-Prowse on the pitch. And I don't think Ward-Prowse brings enough to the team on the pitch to warrant starting over Souček or even Magassa, in my opinion.
No, I completely agree.
But yeah, let's wrap it up there. So Sloth, going into the game, if you had to predict a winner, who would it be, and what are you going to do? What do you think the score could be?
Well, I was very negative in the last preview video, and I think I went for 3-1 Nottingham Forest, and it went the other way. So I'm going to try and be really negative again and hope that tactic works.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say 3-1 to Spurs with the caveat that I'm trying not to be outwardly hopeful.
Yeah, I think just with how Spurs, the last game didn't go so well for them, and I think with them only conceded one goal, I think it's going to be tricky and a bit of a tough ask for us to get anything really out of Spurs. I really think Frank will get them up for it. I think this one thing that I always admire about Frank is he knows how to kind of get that team to play, and to do what it did at the City ground or the Etihad to come away with a 2-0 victory. I think he is a manager with a team like Spurs is very well suited for away days, and to use that kind of counter pressing and that counter attacking kind of football. So begrudgingly, I think Spurs might win this. I think 2-1. I think both teams could score in this game. I just think at this stage, for us, Spurs are probably a bit more settled as a unit, and got a bit more they can bring on from the bench, which I think is what could be telling in this game. Obviously, I am hopeful, like you, that my pessimistic and negative nature works in the opposite, and we see that. But if we took all I want to see, really, I can take a defeat in a derby like this, provided we, from the first minute to the last minute, go for it. We don't hold back. I would rather personally see us lose 3-1 and at least go for a game than to lose 2-1 and just kind of hedged our bets throughout and went for it for about 10 minutes. Like, I would rather lose by 2 goals than to lose by, I think that, which is a bit what I know Alex Ferguson used to say, he'd rather lose by 3-1 than lose 2-1, because he'd rather at least go for the game. And that's how I prefer to see our football. I think we look better when we're more aggressive. So I'd like to see us kind of do that, and it promotes good habits in other games. So
definitely,
unfortunately, I think we'll lose. But I do think that this being a derby, the crowd, I think, are going to be up for this. And if, like we said, if someone snaps into, say, Kudus in the first 5 minutes, and then the next tackle is the same, the crowd could come into it, and that could have a benefit, because when that stadium is rocking, let's be fair, it is a cauldron, and we've seen it. If we can get that atmosphere going, and the players are playing up as well to a level that we probably saw against Nottingham Forest, who are a very good team, then yeah, we can definitely cause Spurs problems. But it's going to be a very tough game, and Spurs are, as much as I hate to say it, begrudgingly at this point the better team, and they have a bit more firepower than us. But it's a derby, a bit like the FA Cup. Anything can happen. But Sloth, any last thoughts before we ask everyone else to, as always, sign, subscribe, all that stuff, and leave your comments and know what you think the game's going to be. But Sloth, any last comments before we finish?
I just pray we don't see 5 at the back. To be honest, if we play 4 at the back and we lose, as long as we perform well, I think the last game was a big turning point in the sense of like optimism for the season. It needs to continue. If it doesn't continue, then I think a lot of noise is going to be made, and a lot more than has been with regards to the ownership over the summer and in recent weeks.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point to end on. But let us know your thoughts or your predictions for the game. Are you feeling confident, or a bit like me and Sloth, slightly pessimistic? Do you agree? Would you want to see Kudus and other players just snapped into in the first 5 minutes to get the crowd going? And do you agree that is really what a derby should all be about? But let us know in the comments. If you have liked this video, please do like, share, all of those things. And until next time, come on, you
Come on, you irons.